My name is Kali Jensen. I'm 29 years old. And this is how I took revenge on the people who called me too sensitive and threw me out like I didn't matter. Asterisk. The bookstore was quiet. The kind of quiet that hummed like safety. Shelves of stories stood tall around me. But my eyes were on one girl, late teens, headphones in, hoodie sleeves tugged over her wrists. She picked up a copy of The House with No Mirrors, my debut novel. She turned it over, scanned the blurb, and didn't put it back. I watched her walk toward the register like she'd just found something she didn't even know she was looking for. I almost smiled, because I knew that book wasn't just a story. It was survival, confession, and maybe revenge. Asterisk. But before it was a novel, it was real life. Flashback. I'm standing on my parents' porch, suitcase at my feet, mascara bleeding down my cheeks. My dad's voice, hard and sharp, echoes through the night. You're not a victim, Kali. You're just weak. I remember clutching the railing like it would explain to me how this had become my life. I hadn't stolen anything. I wasn't flunking out of school. My crime was crying too much, panicking too often, feeling everything too deeply. I was anxious, overwhelmed, raw, and they hated it. They didn't believe in therapy. Said my panic attacks were just a need for attention. Said I should toughen up. My mother stopped hugging me. My brother stopped inviting me to anything. And my dad, he packed the suitcase, told me I was too much to deal with. That night, they pushed me out like I was defective, like being sensitive made me broken. Asterisk. That was the night I realized my sensitivity wasn't just misunderstood. It was hated. They didn't want to deal with me because I made them uncomfortable. My pain made them feel powerless, so they labeled me dramatic. My honesty was inconvenient, so they called me unstable. They didn't try to understand. They didn't ask how they could help. They just wanted me gone. Asterisk. And I left, not because I believed them, but because I had to prove, mostly to myself, that I wasn't weak, that my emotions weren't flaws, that being sensitive didn't make me disposable. Asterisk. That night was the end of one story. Asterisk. But the beginning of mine. Asterisk. I wasn't always the girl on the porch with a suitcase and mascara running down her face. Before that night, I was just a kid who cried too easily and learned too early that tears made people uncomfortable. I remember being 6, sobbing, because Nate, my older brother, hid my favorite stuffed rabbit. Instead of comfort, I got my mother's sharp whisper, "You need to toughen up, Kali." That phrase would follow me through childhood like a curse. When a teacher snapped at me in 2nd grade and I welled up in front of the class, the same message came. Toughen up. Stop being dramatic. No one likes a crybaby. It wasn't just disapproval. It was shame wrapped in politeness. Discipline dressed as concern. Asterisk. My mother, Diane, cared about appearances. Hair always perfect. House always spotless. Smiles always rehearsed. She believed in neatness, not just of the home, but of emotions. Emotional outbursts were messy, unbecoming, embarrassing. If I cried in public, she'd hiss my name like a threat. At home, she vacuumed with a vengeance, like my feelings had stained the carpet. My father, Eric, was colder. Ex-military, sharp-edged, always in control. He didn't raise his voice much, but when he did, it came like thunder. To him, sensitivity was weakness, a liability, something to be eradicated. When I cried, he didn't yell, he dismissed, looked away like I was wasting his time. "You're fine," he'd mutter. You're not dying. And maybe I wasn't. But sometimes it felt like I was. Nate, my older brother, was everything I wasn't. Athletic, confident, emotionally untouchable. He could charm adults, lead crowds, brush off criticism like lint. He was the golden child. I was the smudge on the window. He teased me constantly, called me the broken one in middle school, told his friends I was just weird. If I got upset, he'd roll his eyes and say, "See what I mean?" And I believed him. I started to believe I was broken. The only place I ever felt whole was in stories. In notebooks I hid under my bed. I started writing poems when I was 12. Little confessions I couldn't say out loud. In high school, I wrote letters I never sent, stories I never showed anyone, except one teacher, Mrs. Blair. She taught English and once pulled me aside after class, held up a short story I'd written, and said, "The world tries to break people like you. Don't let it." She was the first adult who didn't see my softness as a flaw. She saw it as something worth protecting. I got into college for creative writing. It felt like a small miracle. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found a place where I could breathe. But anxiety doesn't care about fresh starts. My panic attacks got worse. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. I missed classes, failed assignments. Eventually, I dropped out halfway through my second year. I told myself I'd regroup, come back stronger. I just needed a little time. I went home, thinking maybe, finally, they'd understand. But instead of comfort, I got cold stares, disappointment. My mother accused me of being lazy. My father didn't say much, just walked away. Nate laughed and said, "So much for your little writing dream." And then came the dinner, a birthday. For my uncle, a crowded table, too much noise. I felt it coming, my hands shaking, chest tightening. The rush of heat behind my eyes. I stood up, whispered, "I need to step out." And my mother hissed, "Not here, Collie. Don't make a scene." I bolted, cried in the hallway, chest heaving. When I came back, everyone stared like I'd ruined everything. The next day, my dad packed my bag, said I needed to get help, but not from them. That was 8 years ago. Now I live in a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. 4th floor walk up. Kitchen the size of a closet. Window that barely opens. But it's mine. I work part-time at a library. Quiet, peaceful, surrounded by books. At night, I write. Always. Pages and pages. It took me 6 years and 1,000 abandoned drafts. But I've finally finished a novel. And not just any novel. A story about a girl who was told she was too much, too dramatic, too broken. A girl who was kicked out for being sensitive. And this time, she gets to write the ending. The night I finished the manuscript, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a chipped mug of cold tea and stared at the last sentence. Like it had been waiting for me my whole life. She wasn't fragile. She was just never given a safe place to land. I read it once, twice, then again through blurred eyes, and by the time the tears came, I let them. Not the kind that stung, but the kind that felt like something old breaking loose. I had poured every buried ache, every unspoken wound, every silenced scream into that book. I called it Soft but Unbreakable, a title that felt like both a wish and a warning. On a whim, still trembling, I submitted it to a small contest for unpublished writers. No expectations, just hope. That stubborn, quiet thing that refuses to die. Weeks passed. I went back to shelving books. answering late-night emails at the library desk, and writing when I could. Not because I believed anything would come of it, but because it was the only thing that made me feel real. Then came the call. I was in the fiction section, reshelving a copy of Sylvia Plath when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. And the woman's voice on the other end said, "Collie Jensen, congratulations. You've won." I stood frozen between the shelves. My knees buckled and I slid to the floor right there in the aisle, blinking through disbelief as she explained. A publishing deal, marketing support, launch events, interviews. My book was going to be real. Bound, printed, read. Asterisk, but the thing that shattered me wasn't the joy. It came 2 weeks later, in an email from the publisher's marketing team. They loved the book, couldn't wait to push it out. One small request. We'd love a quote from someone close to you, a friend or family member, something personal. I stared at the message. Reread it 5, 10 times. Someone close to me, someone who believed in me. I had no one, no partner, no best friend, no family, no history. I'd been surviving so long, I hadn't noticed how completely I'd been erased. Asterisk, that night, I curled up in bed and pulled out my old phone, the one I hadn't touched in years. Its cracked screen still worked. I scrolled through ancient messages, frozen pieces of a life that no longer existed. My mother's cold one-liners. "Collie, we can't help you if you won't help yourself." Nate's mocking jokes. "Is this another episode, or just your normal mood?" Then I found it. A voicemail, dated 3 days before I left. I pressed play. Nate's voice, half bored, half disgusted, crackled through the speaker. "You're too soft for this world. Grow a spine before it crushes you." Click. That was it. No warmth, no regret. Asterisk, but I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I sat up, turned on my lamp, and opened my laptop. I scrolled to chapter 14, the one with the heroine's quiet, golden boy brother, the one who was kind, the one who tried. And I began to rewrite. I named him Nathan, made him clever, cruel, and surgically charming. Gave him lines stolen straight from that voicemail. Let him tear the heroine down with a smile. And I didn't stop there. I added scenes, sharpened them, let the emotional bruises linger on the page. Asterisk, this time, I wasn't writing just to survive. Asterisk, I was writing to be heard. Asterisk, the revenge had begun, not in confrontation, not in chaos, but in the one place they'd never look. Asterisk, the page. As the release date crept closer, the manuscript stopped feeling like fiction and started feeling like a mirror. I had angled toward the past, just tilted enough that no one outside my family would notice, but anyone who knew us couldn't possibly miss it. I rewrote the mother character with sharp elegance, every line borrowed from Diane's mouth. Control your emotions before they embarrass you. Crying is manipulative. You'll never survive in the real world if you let every little thing get to you. Word for word. The father was easy. He barely spoke in life or in the book. His silence, his cold shoulder, his ability to exit a room without ever looking back. That became his character's signature. And the brother, I gave him Nate's smile. The kind that felt warm until it wasn't. His lines came straight from memory. You're just broken. You're not interesting. You're exhausting. No one wants to carry dead weight. Asterisk, but it wasn't just their words. I put in the scenes, too. I told the truth the way only fiction lets you. The panic attack on the porch. It's in Chapter 7. Word for word. She asks to breathe. And they say, not here, not now. I wrote it as it happened. Her kneeling in the dark with mascara dripping onto the welcome mat. While her family went back inside without her. I didn't change the weather. I didn't soften the edges. I wanted people to feel it. To feel me. Asterisk, my editor called the book brutally honest, painfully raw, unforgettable. I smiled when I read her notes, not because it felt like a compliment, but because it felt like justice. Then the social media campaign launched. Quotes were everywhere. Instagram graphics, TikTok videos, Twitter threads. Readers called it the book that explains being sensitive better than anything else. My inbox flooded with strangers saying, "Thank you for putting this into words. This is my story too." I cried on the train. Someone tattooed a quote on their arm. They called me fragile, but I was always breakable like a wave, not a glass. That line had poured out of me at 2 a.m. on a night I almost gave up, and now it was inked into someone else's skin. I didn't know how to hold that. Asterisk, then came the DM. Asterisk, it was from Nate. Asterisk, is this book about us? Asterisk, no hi. No congrats. Just that. Asterisk, I stared at the message, my heart strangely steady. Then another ping. This time from my mother. Asterisk, how dare you shame this family? Asterisk, a familiar line. I could almost hear her voice, breathless with rage but still perfectly composed. I didn't respond. I didn't delete the messages either. I wanted them to sit there like tiny unopened coffins. But the silence didn't hold. The calls started coming. Unknown numbers. Voicemails I didn't listen to. I blocked one. Another came. Then came the shock I didn't see coming. Asterisk, at my first book signing. A small indie bookstore in the village. I looked up from signing a copy and saw him, Nate, standing near the back in a navy jacket, trying to look casual. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen him in 8 years. He looked the same, which made me furious. How dare he still look like family? Asterisk, when the line thinned, he stepped forward. I didn't offer a hug. He didn't either. He just said, "You've made things really hard for us. People are calling. Neighbors. Friends. They think we're monsters." Asterisk, I looked him in the eye, calm but burning. "Now you know what it feels like to be exposed." Asterisk, he flinched. "It's not fair, Collie. We're not characters in your book." Asterisk, no, I said. "You're worse, because you had real chances, real years, and you still chose cruelty every time." Asterisk, he didn't argue, just stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman behind the table. Asterisk, we're being harassed. He said, "Mom's not sleeping. Dad's furious." Asterisk, good, I said. Maybe now she knows how it felt to be 17 and afraid to speak at dinner. Maybe he knows how it felt to disappear in front of him and never get looked at again. Asterisk, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Stop the book tour, Collie. This doesn't have to go on." Asterisk, but it did. It had to. Asterisk, I sat up straighter, held his gaze, and said, "I'm not done yet." Asterisk, because the truth was, I'd barely started. Asterisk. When the invitation came in, I almost said no. A live podcast taping titled Daughters Who Weren't Believed. It felt too raw, too direct. I'd already poured my soul into a novel, faced my family's fury, watched my brother try to guilt me into silence, but this would be something else. No fiction to hide behind. No characters to soften the blow. Just my voice, my face, my truth. I sat with the email for days before I finally typed yes. The night of the taping. The room was packed. Soft lights, rows of folding chairs, and a quiet anticipation that made my palms sweat. I took a deep breath, stepped onto the stage, and opened with a sentence that had lived inside me for years. My family told me I was too sensitive. I believed them. Then I wrote my story. And now, so many others tell me it saved their lives. The silence afterward was thick, heavy. The kind of silence where everyone's breathing at the same time, afraid to exhale. Then came the applause. And after that, the flood. The episode went live 2 days later. Within hours, it started trending. By the end of the week, it had millions of listens. Twitter exploded with quotes, threads, confessions. People from all walks of life shared their own stories. How they were told to stop being dramatic. How they were dismissed, mocked, left to figure out the ache alone. I've never felt more seen. One woman tweeted. Another wrote, "This podcast cracked open a part of me I didn't know was still hurting." My inbox filled with letters from strangers. My book, Soft but Unbreakable, shot to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. I refreshed the page 3 times just to believe it. And that night, as I stood backstage after the taping, catching my breath, I saw her, Mrs. Blair, my high school English teacher, the only adult who ever told me my softness wasn't shameful. She stood near the edge of the stage, wiping tears from her cheeks. We hugged without speaking. Her presence felt like a full-circle moment I hadn't known I needed. Like someone from the before finally witnessing the after. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my dress, still in disbelief, when my phone lit up. My mother. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then, slowly, I picked up. Her voice was tense, cold, but shaking. "You made us look like monsters," she said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I simply replied. I wrote what happened. If the shoe fits, maybe you should ask yourself why. There was silence on the other end. No denial, no anger, just the stunned stillness of someone who, for the first time, couldn't rewrite the story. And then came Nate. A long, winding message. He said he'd been thinking, said he wanted to reconnect, said maybe he hadn't realized what it had been like for me. "We were kids," he wrote. "I didn't understand back then." I read it twice, then left it on read. Because understanding now doesn't erase what happened then. Because forgiveness is not the same as access. Because I had spent too long shrinking, hiding, doubting the weight of my own hurt. And now, finally, I was done being silent. My story had been seen. And I wasn't giving it back. A year after the book tour, I moved into a small cedar home nestled in the woods of upstate New York. The air smelled like pine and possibility. The mornings were still and kind. Birdsong replacing sirens. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was bracing for something. I planted herbs on the windowsill, adopted a senior cat named Olive who snored louder than I did. My days slowed down. I read more, walked without headphones, let silence feel like safety instead of isolation. And in that quiet, a new kind of voice started to form. Not urgent, not frantic, but steady, certain. I used the money from the book to start a small foundation called Soft Strength. It was built for teens who'd been told the same things I once was, that they were too much, too broken, too dramatic. We offered workshops, therapy scholarships, peer circles, safe places to land. the kind I never had. I worked with counselors, trauma specialists, poets. We taught kids how to feel without shame, speak without apology, exist without needing to shrink. Every time I watched one of them read a poem aloud or open up about panic attacks without fear, it felt like I was healing a younger version of myself. And I wrote again. Not another revenge story. That part of me had said what it needed to say. This new book was about healing, about the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding a self you were taught to hide. It was quieter, gentler, but maybe even more powerful. I didn't flinch writing it. I didn't cry. I exhaled. It came from a place of peace, not pain. One morning, while drinking coffee on the porch, I opened a letter from a teenage girl in Minnesota. Her handwriting was uneven, as if she'd rushed to get the words out. I showed my mom your book. She cried and finally took me to therapy. Thank you. I read it 3 times, holding it like something sacred. I didn't cry, not out of suppression, but because I felt whole. For the first time in my life, I felt proud of who I was, not in spite of my sensitivity, but because of it. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a TEDx conference titled The Power of Being Too Much. I stood under the red circle of light, took a deep breath, and began. They tried to silence me. I turned my voice into a weapon, then into a bomb. And I meant every word. Now, I don't write to prove anything. I don't write to be seen. I write so others can feel less alone. Because soft doesn't mean weak. And I was never broken, just never given room to bloom. I hadn't been back in years, but something pulled me to the small bookstore in my hometown. The same one I used to hide in after school, pretending the pages could protect me from the weight of being too much. The bell above the door still jingled the same. The floors still creaked. But this time, something was different. In the front window display, right between the bestsellers and the local author shelf, was my book. Soft but unbreakable. Face out. Bold. Unapologetic. I walked slowly to the shelf, heart thudding, and pulled a sticky note from my bag. I'd written it on the train, hands slightly shaking. To the girl they told was too sensitive. You're not broken. You're brave. I placed it on the edge of the shelf, tucked neatly beneath the cover. Not for attention. For her, whoever she might be. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of a woman walking in, maybe 17, hoodie sleeves over her hands, eyes scanning nervously. She paused in front of the display, reached out, and picked up my book. I watched her hold it to her chest like it might be armor. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say who I was. I just whispered, as I passed through the door, "This is for every time I was told to toughen up." And instead, I told the truth. The air outside felt warmer somehow, even in the quiet chill. And as I walked down the street I used to cry on, I felt something solid in my chest. Not anger, not grief, but power. They kicked me out to punish me, but it gave me something they'll never have. A voice the world actually listens to.